Mountain man discovers touching bond with giant dog. He adopted at auction. What happened next is... Jake stood at the edge of the auction lot, eyes narrowed against the midday sun, staring at the scruffy beast that seemed more shadow than substance. Bear. The name suited the dog well, with his matted fur and perpetually sad eyes. A lump formed in Jake's throat. There was a simplicity to those kind eyes, an unspoken understanding that momentarily pierced through the guarded walls he'd built around his heart. Years spent as a logger had hardened him, and now, at 45, he lived alone in the quiet embrace of the mountains, distancing himself from the judgment of townsfolk who whispered of misdeeds and troubled pasts. But here with Bear, something stirred, a longing that clashed fiercely with his reclusive nature. The first time he extended his hand toward the dog, Jake felt an urge to rescue him echoing his own desperation. He hesitated, the weight of the townspeople's disdain rattling through his mind as he contemplated bringing a misfit into his home. What if they were right? What if he failed this creature as he failed others before? That fear twisted in his gut like a vice. But when Bear looked up at him, hope mingled with longing. It was raw and beautiful, pressing against the hardened shell Jake had become as the years dragged on. He wouldn't let the dog down, couldn't bear to think of it. He took a deep breath and raised his hand. The decision made, but the shadows of doubt still loomed overhead. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. In the days following Bear's arrival, laughter began to creep back into the corners of Jake's cabin where silence had reigned for so long. They developed a rhythm, waking up with the sun, embarking on hikes through the wild, exploring hidden trails, and feeling the weathered earth beneath their feet. Yet as their bond deepened, a gnawing anxiety settled in Jake's chest. What if the townspeople were watching, waiting to pounce on any perceived missteps? What if they dared to question his role as Bear's guardian? A gnawing fear clawed at him as he considered taking Bear into town. The very thought stirred a tempest within. Would he have to face judgment again? Tension tightened, pressing against him like the weight of the lumber he once hauled, and every interaction with townsfolk felt like a minefield. When Bear leaped into action, rescuing that child from the ravine, a twist of fate that thrust him and Jake into the limelight, Jake had felt pride-filled bewilderment, but that quickly spiraled into dread. A local veterinarian, with her polished airs and elitist view on living, began murmuring about Jake's resemblance to a recluse, speculating about his past and suitability as a pet owner. Her words stung. They twisted memories of isolation and judgment. Jake's heart raced with the growing unease of public scrutiny versus the serene happiness he'd begun to cultivate with Bear. Caught between wanting to flaunt the love he felt for the dog and retreating back into the safety of solitude, Jake grappled with the upheaval. Could he rise up against the scrutiny, or would it shatter the newfound family he had built with Bear? Just as acceptance began to feel within reach, a fear simmered, brewing a storm that threatened to drag him into the depths of his old, lonely existence. Would the fragile companionship they had formed withstand the relentless doubts that clawed at his consciousness? The answer hung like the mountain fog, elusive and pressing, leaving Jake's heart heavy with uncertainty. Jake stared out a window, watching the trees sway in the wind. Bear lay sprawled on the floor, his massive body an anchor to reality. The comfort of the cabin was undeniable, but Jake felt an undercurrent of agitation, one that set his nerves alight like fire on dry wood. He had been picking up the pieces of his life, making small progress that felt monumental. He thought that adopting Bear might serve as a catalyst to transform himself further, but as the whispers in town grew louder, he started to question whether he was the right man for the role he'd taken on. Getting Bear settled into his life had been an exercise in rediscovering joy, providing meals, purchasing toys, and choosing to comfort him during thunderstorms. With each passing day, Bear propelled Jake toward openness he had long evaded. The depth of that bond was unmistakably beautiful, yet Jake found ambiguity lurking beneath it. Could his trust in this creature forge the courage he lacked? One afternoon, with resolute determination, he decided it was time to introduce Bear to the townspeople. The idea filled him with both excitement and trepidation. He geared Bear up, slipping a leash over his massive head, as the dog wagged his tail, blissfully unaware of the anxiety thrumming through his owner. As they walked down the dusty path toward town, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was striding into hostile territory. The trees seemed to close in around him, shadows twisting, mirroring his conflicting emotions. Discussions of judgment resurfaced, remnants of his past echoing in his mind like ochre whispers on the breeze. The ground beneath his boots felt uneven, unsure, as if daring him to stop. Entering the town square, Jake's heart raced. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself as he felt the weight of the townspeople's curious stares. Would they see the love between him and Bear, or would judgment mar their view? Each step felt monumental, and with each passerby who acknowledged them, however with awkward glances, his resolve began to solidify. Then came the moment that suspended time. An elderly couple approached, their dog sniffing at the air, playfully tugging at his master's. This should have felt pleasant, a bridge to community, yet Jake's thoughts began spiraling again. Would they question his suitability to own Bear? "What a beast you've got there," the man chuckled, playfully tousling Bear's fur. The warmth of the interaction momentarily dissipated Jake's anxiety, yet he swiftly regained his guard. "Yeah, he's something, isn't he?" Jake replied, the words thudding as they escaped. Had he even offered a hint of excitement? After a brief exchange, the couple moved on, leaving a disconcerting silence around him once more. At that moment, Jake realized how much fear had governed his actions, how it had narrowed his world down to shadows and distance since long before Bear had entered his life. The reflection in the couple's delighted eyes, unadulterated joy toward Bear, unraveled something deep within him. In that instant, Jake had a revelation. He was not only a recluse, but also a resilient force, capable of bringing sparks of life into the world he had distanced himself from, if he could embrace the bond he had with Bear. Maybe this was the fuel to trust himself once more. But as he prepared to muster strength through vulnerability, a piercing voice interrupted his thoughts. "You should know better than to walk around with that beast, Jake." The local veterinarian's derisive tone cut through the fading whispers of reassurance. The mocking tone was an anchor dragging him back into the depths he'd fought so hard to escape. The moment had arrived to confront the demons of his past, yet the burden of doubt still whispered directly into his ear, teasing him with fear of failure. Would he continue to shrink away into the shadows, or take the leap into the world he wanted to embrace? Jake clenched the leash tighter, feeling the warmth of Bear beside him. Unsure how the confrontation would unfold, he understood that the course of his future depended on what he chose to do next. The question now loomed before him. How much was he willing to fight for a place in the world he once fumbled through? A place where judgment was met with acceptance? Jake lifted his chin, narrowing his focus on the veterinarian's gaze, knowing that the time had come to face his fears head-on. Jake felt the air compress around him as he met the veterinarian's eyes, a mixture of defiance and trepidation swirling in his gut. "What did you just say?" "That dog isn't fit for anyone, especially not someone like you. You've always been a bit of a recluse, haven't you? Why take on such a responsibility?" The veterinarian's words dripped with condescension, echoing the very insecurities Jake was fighting to escape. His hands tightened on Bear's leash, yet he felt the stir of a fire within, a flicker of determination that arose in direct proportion to the challenge laid before him. Deep breaths came in waves, and he remembered the joyful wag of Bear's tail, the moments of sheer happiness they'd shared. "You don't know anything about me," Jake replied, his voice steadier than he felt. There was an unexpected power in confronting the judgment, a strange buoyancy as he carefully laid out his own truth. "Bear brings joy to my life, and I bring joy to his. Isn't that what matters?" The veterinarian's lips curled in amusement rather than acknowledgement, but Jake refused to break eye contact. Denial of his worth had shadowed him for too long. For once, He could simply stand and declare his truth, even in the face of negativity. "Joy, that giant won't help you make friends or rebuild your life, Jake," the veterinarian shot back, striding closer as if trying to physically dominate the space between them. Something in Jake snapped. The sense of isolation that dulled his spirit began to clear. "You know what? This isn't about you or your opinions. I'm done with that world where your voice determines how I should feel." The words were a revelation, an unearthing of his latent self that lay dormant for years. Each sentence felt like it had been fought for, echoing the belief that perhaps he was capable of something much more significant than simply existing in fear. Bear thumped his massive tail against Jake's leg, and there was an unspoken encouragement coursing between them. This was his moment to cement their bond, to show the townsfolk, despite the few derogatory comments that shadowed his confidence, he was making a choice. Their connection was more profound than the limitations defined by others. Jake stepped forward, challenging the crowd that had slowly gathered. They'd been passive observers, but now he engaged them all. "I might not be perfect, but I'm trying. I'm fighting for my spot in this world, one step at a time, with Bear beside me." Gasps, whispers, and raised eyebrows surrounded him. But as he gazed around the crowd, he saw something shift. What once seemed like judgment morphed into a curiosity that beckoned acceptance. Their faces now reflected more than suspicion. They captured a moment of intrigue. "Nah, I'm not just some guy with a dog. I am Jake, and I'm learning to do this. To face fear. I won't run away. I will stand here no matter the hostility or the laughter." His declaration erupted from him like a geyser, each word sculpting a new form of resolve that shattered the doubts he'd nurtured for so long. The veterinarian's demeanor faltered, just for a split second, and in that hesitation, Jake seized the chance to draw strength from the gravity of his own conviction. Not every word required validation from outside. Sometimes the loudest voice was the one echoing within. Jake's heart raced as the tension slowly dissipated. Perhaps today wasn't about gaining approval, but merely sharing his truth, standing grounded in the moment despite the turmoil. He felt a sense of belonging blossom within as he glanced at Bear, who looked up at him with unswerving adoration. Yet beneath this shared victory lingered a disquieting question. Would his newfound courage hold when faced with tougher challenges ahead? The thought flickered dangerously, sparking an uncertainty that tinged his exhilaration. As he surveyed the townspeople's shifting expressions, he realized he was standing on the brink of transformation, and the finality of this fading judgment left a potent curiosity within him. What would he face once he stepped fully into this world? In the distance, he spotted familiar frowns and figured silhouettes at the edges of the crowd. Would the support of a few misgivings be enough to weather future blows? That doubt began creeping back. But perhaps it was time to step away from the shadows and into uncharted territory, where the solace of friendship could amplify the courage he was just beginning to wield. Because now, more than ever, he craved to know if the bond he felt with Bear could weather what waited in the wings. Determined to navigate whatever lay ahead, Jake felt the moment surge within him. His journey was poised at the edge of something much greater. Would he have the strength to remain authentic as life's challenges unfolded? As each flicker of fear tried to restore its grip, a new resolve hardened in his chest. A decision to confront life's complexities head-on, come what may. And as they turned away from the town square, he couldn't shake the question that shadowed him. What trials would define his resolve in the days to come? Jake settled back into his routine, but the aftershock of his confrontation still crackled through him. Each morning began with a renewed sense of purpose. The leash felt heavier in his hand, but not from the weight of Bear's size. Instead, it was symbolic of the responsibility he now embraced. They ventured into the woods daily, where the solitude of nature fostered conversations between him and his thoughts, the kind that could only come from being surrounded by trees and the fresh scent of pine. As Bear bounded through the underbrush, Jake watched him play. The dog's enthusiasm reminded him of the depths of his own happiness. With each passing day, it dawned on him that these moments weren't merely escapism. They nurtured a courage in him he had scarcely recognized before. Dare he explore this growth further? What if the bond he built with Bear extended beyond mere companionship? One afternoon, while sitting on a fallen log, Jake picked up a stick and began to carve away the bark with a small pocket knife he had found in his grandfather's belongings. It was a simple act, yet as curls of wood fell around him, he found a strange clarity. This small, crafted piece became an embodiment of his journey, transformation from self-doubt to a tactile piece of art. He wasn't just shaping wood, he was reshaping his narrative. It struck him then with a sudden intensity. This could be a metaphor for his life. Each chip of wood removed echoed a doubt being cast away, a layer of fear stripped down, revealing potential underneath. What other hidden skills lay dormant within him? What was he capable of creating beyond physical objects? The following morning, rather than retreating into the woods, Jake attended a woodworking class at a local community center. It had been years since he had engaged in any social activities, and yet as the instructor welcomed attendees, Jake's heart thundered in his chest. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, a stark contrast to the silence he often wrapped himself in. He settled in at a workbench, his tools neatly spread before him. The techniques seemed rudimentary, yet each cut and joint felt like a new language he was learning. For the first time in years, he was surrounded by people, not a single judgmental eye, but instead curious glances, some nods of encouragement. With Bear waiting outside, Jake felt empowered, as if the dog was a silent cheerleader in his corner. As the instructor guided them through the process of building a simple wooden chair, Jake's determination flared. This wasn't merely about crafting furniture, but about reclaiming agency. Each student was focused, yet for Jake, the stakes felt higher. Yet even as his confidence soared, a familiar nagging thought crept in. Was he still merely masking his insecurities? Each moment of invigoration was punctuated by a whisper. This might not last. What if he stumbled? What if others sensed his vulnerability? As they reached the project's midway point, during a break, Jake struck up a conversation with the man next to him. The man shared his history of woodworking and the therapeutic solace it provided. Hearing this struck a chord deep within Jake, the connection between art and personal growth. They spoke of their own struggles with anxiety and fears, each sharing fragments of their journey. That conversation rang in Jake's ears long after the class finished. Could he incorporate what he learned into a professional venture? His thoughts began to swirl around the idea of opening a small workshop, combining his newfound woodworking skills with the quiet companionship he valued so much from Bear. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jake stood at the edge of the forest, a world that had once felt so isolating now brimming with possibility. He felt the pull of dual responsibilities, and not just towards Bear but towards himself and what he wanted to build in life. Yet just as his confidence began to solidify around the new steps he envisioned, the shadow of doubt danced on the periphery. Could he truly step into this new venture, leaving behind the shadows of his past while bearing the weight of fear? With Bear by his side, Jake made his way home, plotting the steps ahead, determined yet apprehensive. Every decision felt like a leap, but what if the most significant leap of all was still to come? The uncertainty clung to him as he stepped inside the door, the challenge of defining his next chapter hanging palpably in the air. What awaited him on this uncharted course could very well redefine not just his present, but his future. Would he summon the will to fully immerse himself in this pursuit, bucking the tide of his self-doubt? Jake awoke the next morning, the dawn light filtering through his bedroom window, illuminating the remnants of yesterday's hopes scattered across his mind. The thought of returning to the woodworking class filled him with a mixture of excitement and dread. He pushed away the covers and swung his legs over the side of the bed, planting his feet firmly on the floor. Today was pivotal. As Bear nudged Jake with his large snout, the dog's eager eyes implored a simple request: to venture outdoors to explore. They walked along a familiar path, but Jake couldn't shake the weight of the decision looming over him. What would tomorrow hold? Who would he be if he committed to opening a workshop? Back in the workshop, the atmosphere buzzed with creativity, fueled by the collective excitement of dreams taking shape in wood. The instructor, a seasoned craftsman named Leo, moved from table to table, offering tips and joining in conversations. Jake felt himself drawn to Leo's confident demeanor. He seemed to embody the journey that Jake desperately wanted to navigate. Have you ever transformed your skill into something more? Leo's question to the group flipped a switch in Jake's mind. A simple inquiry, yet it unraveled a thread of possibility woven throughout his ambitions. Jake observed others respond with words of aspiration. He listened intently, yet felt detached, a spectator caught in a moment too electric to join. After class, Jake felt compelled to approach Leo. "I've been thinking about starting my own workshop, sharing woodworking with others, maybe." The words tumbled out, loaded with an urgency that surprised even him. Leo's eyes sparkled with interest. "And what's holding you back, Jake?" He paused for a moment, grappling with the truth lying beneath his bravado. Fear. Fear of failing. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't connect with others? What if I mess it all up? Leo seemed to contemplate this before nodding in understanding. "Everyone feels fear, Jake. It's what you do with it that counts. When you create, you invite others into the journey. Start small, gather like-minded individuals who share the same passion. Those connections can be empowering." Jake absorbed the wisdom like a sponge, recognizing the nuance of vulnerability woven into Leo's words. Could he blend his artistic journey with a community endeavor? The idea collided with his apprehensions, igniting a sliver of determination within. Returning home that night, Bear's presence beside him was a steady reminder of his growing resolve. What if he dedicated himself to engaging others through woodworking and the bond he felt with Bear? It was no longer merely about carving wood, but creating a space where stories intertwined, laying bare fears through art. With a pen in hand and a notepad resting on his kitchen table, Jake issued himself a challenge: map out the steps towards developing his workshop idea. As he jotted down thoughts, a surprising clarity emerged, guiding him. Location, necessary tools, materials, and a flyer to distribute. Each stroke of the pen was an act of defiance against his doubt. When he paused to consider what the workshop could resemble, excitement surged through him. A community of learners, all sharing, crafting, and exploring their fears together. Yet, amidst the fervor, shadows of doubt resurfaced. What if he couldn't attract anyone? What if the workshop ended up a solitary endeavor, just another failure on the list? A voice in his head whispered that staying in his comfort zone might be safer. But Jake recognized those whispers. They were just reminders of the life he wanted to transcend. Embracing this struggle was part of creation, as was sharing it. Fueled by a passion that surged each time he pictured Bear beside him, Jake made a plan, his first step towards a broader horizon. Tomorrow he would test those waters, ignite curiosity, and reach out to those crafty souls in his community. As he finally settled in for the night, a sense of excitement mingled with uncertainty. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would present a confrontation, the challenge of facing not just his fears, but the hearts of those he hoped to inspire. One question lingered in the back of his mind. Would his venture ultimately serve as an affirmation of his growth, or as a reminder of his limitations? With Bear snoring softly at his feet, Jake closed his eyes, bracing for the leap that awaited him beyond the threshold of his front door. The journey had only just begun, but the clock was ticking, and each tick nudged him closer to an encounter that could change everything. Jake woke with the sun just peeking over the horizon. Its rays slipped through his window, casting a warm glow on the kitchen table where his plans lay sprawled out like a blueprint for his future. Bear stirred beside him, sensing the anticipation in the air. Today was the day he would make his first move toward turning an abstract dream into a tangible reality. As he sipped his coffee, Jake studied his notes. The logistics seemed manageable. A location, perhaps a community center room, a shared space that felt less daunting than a standalone workshop. He had a handful of ideas for a flyer, a simple yet inviting design that spoke of learning, exploration, and camaraderie. Still, the creeping shadows of self-doubt clung closer than ever. He took a deep breath, allowing his mind to drift to Leo's encouraging words. Start small. What if he could create something intimate, a gathering of just a few souls? Jake's thoughts shifted to how he might frame the first session. It wouldn't just be about woodworking. It would be about sharing his journey, understanding the fears that held them all back and channeling those feelings into the wood and tools before them. Bear nudged him again, a reminder that action was required beyond contemplation. "Okay, boy. Let's go." They ventured out for their morning walk, and as the cool air filled Jake's lungs, his resolve solidified. He could do this. As they strolled through the neighborhood, he mentally rehearsed the conversation he would need to have in the community center. Upon returning home, he resisted the urge to procrastinate, confronting the looming task head-on. A timid knock on the door interrupted his focus. It was Lisa, his neighbor, also an avid DIY enthusiast. "Morning, Jake. Heard you talking about starting a workshop. Can I join?" Her unexpected enthusiasm struck a chord in him. I was actually going to ask around today," he stammered, surprised by the warmth of her interest. Their conversations in passing began to bubble over into reality, and it felt good to connect. "Great. I've got a lot to learn," she said, her eyes brightening with potential. "I've been wanting to try some new techniques, and starting in a group sounds perfect." As they spoke, Jake felt the weight of his insecurities lift just slightly. Talking about his plans, sharing his vision with someone who was genuinely interested, injected a sense of purpose into his day. The workshop wasn't just his. It was becoming theirs, an assembly of shared passions and hopes. However, part of him simmered with anxiety. What if it didn't work? Had he said too much too soon? Confronting his fears was one thing, but carrying the burden of potential failure alongside someone else's expectations felt daunting. Thus, he returned indoors and pulled out his notepad once again, mapping out exactly what his first gathering would encompass: introductions, shared fears, and an initial project that symbolized growth. Each stroke of the pen detailed not just plans, but also the essence of what the workshop could become: a place of open expression, where vulnerability was not something to fear but to embrace. Yet, as he finished, his heart began to race again. The challenge of bridging his vision with reality suddenly felt monumental. Would others find fulfillment here? With evening settling down, Jake made a small flyer drafting. He envisioned the community center crowded, using pieces of wood from his own hands to create something meaningful together, something that represented overcoming, creation, and connection. But beneath the excitement, a nagging question lingered, simmering like an unresolved tension. What if the vision he held so dear evaporated into thin air? Bear lay beside him, sensing his agitation, bringing an unexpected comfort. In that moment, Jake realized he had one last hurdle to leap before he could see this dream flourish. He needed to muster the courage to post that flyer. Tomorrow would be decisive. As he leaned back in his chair, mind racing, Jake acknowledged the crux of his journey lay not solely in the act of creation, but in the leap into the unknown that would require him to put his heart on the line. The time had come to confront not just his vision, but the hearts of those he sought to inspire. What he didn't know yet was that a surprising new voice would emerge from this endeavor, one that would challenge him even further. Jake woke with renewed determination, the morning sun filtering through the curtains, as if heralding a new chapter in his life. Bear stretched lazily beside him, embodying the calm that Jake was still trying to achieve within. Today was the day he would glue the last piece into place, the act of physically posting the flyer for his workshop. The thought alone sent a jolt of anxiety rippling through him. With Bear trailing behind, he made his way to the local community bulletin board, heart pounding in sync with each footstep. They paused briefly at the edge of the vibrant park, where families were out enjoying the sunny day. Children laughed, and joggers passed in rhythm. Their carefree spirits felt at odds with his internal tumult. What if nobody came? Would he stand alone in that room, an empty echo of a vision he had crafted meticulously yet uncertainly? Jake clenched the flyers in his hand, taking a moment to breathe deeply. The clean, crisp sheets held not just information, but hope and vulnerability. They bore witness to his journey, each line a testament to his desire to connect, create, and restore himself through meaningful interaction. As he approached the bulletin board, he hesitated, chewing on the edge of uncertainty that lingered. What if the lives he wanted to touch remained unmovable? What if his efforts were met with indifference? The thought of a solitary failure felt heavier than the folder of plans he had carried with him. Just before he could brush those ideas aside, Lisa appeared unexpectedly, jogging toward him. "Hey, Jake, is that the flyer?" Her enthusiasm painted a bright picture against the dim artist's palette in his mind. Yes," he managed, holding it out as though it could magically transport his worries elsewhere. "Let's pin it together," she exclaimed, not giving him a chance to respond with anything negative. With nimble fingers, she helped arrange the flyer, embellishing it with her own notes about her excitement for the session. Watching her, Jake felt a flicker of courage ignite within him, yet the backdrop of self-doubt still clung uncomfortably. As they worked side by side, Jake found himself opening up about his aspirations, the desire to empower others through woodworking and creativity. To his surprise, Lisa mirrored his enthusiasm, sharing her own experiences with DIY projects and the community she wished was available when she had first started. Her eyes sparkled with unrefined passion, illuminating parts of his fears as they conversed, shining light on their common insecurities. With the flyer finally posted, a sense of accomplishment washed over him, but it was mixed with an underlying sense of trepidation. As they stepped back to observe their handiwork, a sudden pounding realization hit him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating a space for others to unearth their stories, skills, and aspirations. Later that evening, sitting at his kitchen table where every newly penned idea felt like another link in a chain of possibilities, Jake found himself unraveling the emotional weight of the day. Fear and anticipation twisted together, but the essence of the workshop began to evolve from an abstract notion into something that felt tangible. He recognized that the act of sharing himself allowed him to connect with others' stories, and with that connection came an unusual strength, an intricate weave of shared vulnerability. Yet beneath this burgeoning confidence lingered a question that clawed at the edges of his mind. What would happen if not a single person showed up? Would he be prepared to face that kind of disappointment? And if so, what would it mean for his journey? As night deepened and Bear nestled close, Jake felt the emotional crucible of his endeavor heat around him. In the depths of that uncertainty lay the potential for deeper self-discovery. The moment felt ripe for reckoning. His workshop had space for people, but did he have room for himself? Looking at Bear, he knew the answer lay ahead. He had taken the first step, but if he truly wanted this journey to transform both himself and those around him, he needed to embrace the fear of the unknown and prepare for the reality that awaited. Tomorrow would not only bring the unveiling of his hopes, but perhaps a challenge he could not yet fathom, the challenge of facing the unexpected and confronting the voice that questioned his worthiness to lead others. The moment lurked like a shadow, waiting to emerge into the light. Jake woke with a sense of immediacy that pulsed against the backdrop of uncertainty. The sun climbed higher, casting golden patterns on the wooden floor, but he could hardly feel the warmth as he sat at his table. Today was not only the day of his workshop, it was the day he had to confront the very essence of his ambitions, the fear that threatened to unravel the progress he had made. His hands trembled slightly as he poured coffee, the dark liquid mirroring the swirling doubts in his mind. Bear crouched at his feet, a silent guardian, sensing the tension that crackled in the air. Jake glanced at the flyer, its bright colors seeming to mock him with their optimism. Was it foolish to believe that his hope could translate into reality? He stared out the window where life bustled unbothered by his internal storm. What if today brought nothing but disappointment? What if his dreams were nothing more than a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of expectation? As much as he wanted to shoo away those thoughts, they lingered, heavy and oppressive. Jake inhaled deeply, steeling himself as he gathered his materials, tools, a small selection of pre-cut wood pieces, and notes that structured the workshop's flow. Each item felt like a confidant, an anchor in his swirling sea of neuroses. He had to execute this day despite the grappling forces within him. Driving to the community center, he felt the thrum of anxiety transform into a steady beat of determination. Stray moments of doubt flashed through, but they were countered by an emerging realization. He was not merely a teacher in that room, he was a facilitator for potential. Wasn't there beauty in the process of creation, in stumbling and rising again? The workshop was just as much his journey as it was anyone else's. Upon arriving, Jake stepped inside, the musty smell of the place wrapping around him like an old friend. The room was ready, tables were set, tools organized neatly. He took a moment to prepare himself mentally. As the clock ticked forward, he made small adjustments, aligning each tool with meticulous precision. But with each passing minute, the looming possibility of a deserted space gnawed at him. Perhaps these fear-laden thoughts were akin to old habits, patterns that could be reshaped or discarded if only he allowed himself the chance. Suddenly, a sound pierced through his fog of worry, the jingle of a doorbell. Heart racing, he turned to find the first participant, an older man named Tom, whom he had seen around town but never spoken to. An unexpected thrill coursed through him. Here was someone, a tangible acknowledgement of his effort. "Perfect timing," Jake greeted, forced cheerfulness spilling out. The moment felt fragile yet full of promise. Tom's broad smile was reassuring, and as other participants began to trickle in, Jake found his space filling with warmth and stories. Laughter colored the air, counterbalancing his own trepidations. As they settled in, Jake began to share his vision, articulating the importance of creativity as a means of expression and connection. The participants listened, engaged, and gradually, walls began to melt away. He felt the rhythms of conversation and connection thrumming in the air. Here was a community woven in the fabric of vulnerability, skill, and the desire to create. Yet, a familiar voice still whispered insidiously at the corners of his mind, questioning his every move. Was he truly worthy of this? Of leading them? As laughter erupted and hands worked together, these doubts festered silently beneath the surface. How would he navigate the fine line between guiding them and letting his barriers hinder their experience? Throughout the workshop, moments of emergence arose, participants showcasing their hidden talents, unearthing stories of resilience and creativity. Each revelation pulled Jake deeper into the experience, yet the unsettling question remained. What if he failed to live up to their expectations? By the end of the session, the space pulsated with energy. Unfinished projects lay testament to the creative flow, but Jake felt a growing unrest within. Disappointment had morphed into joy, yet it threatened to coalesce with a lingering fear he had yet to confront. As Bear waited patiently outside, Jake packed up, sensing the challenge that lay ahead. He had taken significant steps, but now had to resolve the duality within, connecting with his participants while confronting the looming specter of self-doubt. Over the last few hours, had he truly inspired them, or had he merely masked his uncertainties with a borrowed enthusiasm? With his thoughts racing, Jake took a deep breath as he stepped outside, the late sunlight bathing him in its glow. The workshop had dissipated some of his fears, but it also ignited more questions than answers. The moment was ripe for revelation, yet he was hesitant to embrace it fully. As he made his way home, one truth crystallized. Tomorrow wouldn't just bring more work. It would challenge him to clear the cobwebs of his mind and understand if he could lead others while still grappling for his own footing. The shadows of self-doubt still lurked, impatient and hungry, waiting to see how far he would journey. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a soft twilight glow that painted Jake's surroundings in muted colors. As he walked, the day swirled in his memory. Faces and laughter intermingled with a nagging sense of inadequacy. Despite the connection he felt with his participants, a hollow feeling echoed within him, urging him to probe deeper. Once home, he dropped his bags beside the door, his mind racing through the nuances of the workshop. The tools he'd brought were just items, yet they had functioned as vessels for transformation, harboring possibilities that lingered just out of reach. Bear padded up to him, nudging his side with a gentle insistence. "Hey, buddy!" Jake knelt to ruffle his fur, finding solace in the steady heartbeat of his dog. Bear mirrored loyalty, a constant amidst the chaos of self-reflection. Yet, as he looked into Bear's trusting eyes, Jake felt a shift, a dawning realization. The bond they shared was more than companionship. It represented the journey of acceptance, not merely for himself, but for all the parts of himself that felt fragmented and uncertain. The evening settled in, and Jake paced around his small studio, cluttered with wood, paint, and tools. He turned on his laptop and began to type notes from the day. Each keystroke was cathartic, as he transcribed the moments of authenticity and joy he'd witnessed during the workshop. The stories of his participants emerged like scattered puzzle pieces, each one revealing the beauty of vulnerability. But the specter of doubt remained, looming over his thoughts. What if tomorrow he found himself unable to replicate this moment of clarity? The thought constricted his throat. It was one thing to inspire others. It was another to summon that same inspiration for himself, every day. He raised his hands, palms open, and took a deep breath. Letting out a slow exhale, Jake pondered his own journey. Every misstep had brought him to this junction. What if he approached tomorrow not just as a leader, but as an equal in this collective experience of growth? Ideas swirled as he wrote, visions forming in his mind of how he might integrate his own struggles into the workshop. Could he take a leap of faith? Sharing his own vulnerabilities might illuminate a pathway for others to connect more deeply. But the internal debate resumed. Who was he to expose his flaws, risking the trust he'd built with the group? The night wore on. He drafted an outline, not just for the workshop, but for an evolving narrative of his own personal development. Each note was both a risk and an opportunity, a reflection of who he was and who he aspired to be. With each entry, he confronted a question. What if revealing his insecurities could unlock a well of potential in others? As he hit save, a surge of exhilaration washed over him. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, yet in that uncertainty lay potential. Tomorrow was no longer viewed through the lens of anxiety. It had transformed into a canvas, a space to explore, share, and build together. With a final look at Bear, who had settled into a peaceful slumber, Jake made a vow to approach the coming day with openness. This was more than a workshop. It was a journey toward authenticity, a chance to weave his story with those of others. He contemplated the questions that lay ahead. What if he fell short? What if his fears clawed their way to the surface again? But as dawn approached, Jake found comfort in another thought. Perhaps the greatest lessons came not from flawless execution, but from the act of navigating imperfection together. As he readied for bed, a new sense of purpose wrapped around him like a warm blanket. This was not merely about leadership. It was about discovering himself anew amidst every challenge. Tomorrow dawned as a new threshold. The only question remained. Could he step through it with courage, fully embracing the unknown? Jake awakened to the soft glow of the sun filtering through the trees, a serene reminder of the beauty surrounding him. Today marked a significant pivot in his journey, the first true step toward harnessing the connections he fostered during the workshop into a sustainable vision. With Bear by his side, he felt renewed vigor coursing through him, shaking off remnants of yesterday's doubts. As they ventured out, Jake held on to the vision that had formed, a workshop nestled in the heart of his community, where individuals could gather and unite in their creativity. The idea of sharing space and stories ignited something within him, unfolding a sense of purpose he had long craved. Bear jumped through the grass, a symbol of joy reflecting the commitment Jake felt to expand beyond just his own isolation. With the sun overhead, Jake made his way to the community center, determined to enact change. As he entered the building and glanced at the now familiar room, the shape of the tables and the tools laid out for the next workshop came alive with possibility. Participants greeted him with familiar smiles, while the chatter about last week's activities resonated with camaraderie, a palpable energy he hadn't anticipated. After gathering everyone, Jake took a deep breath, a mix of excitement and nervousness sweeping over him. This time, however, he recognized a new undercurrent: confidence. The warmth of belonging surrounded him. He shared his plans for the workshop's evolution, weaving in his own story of struggle and transformation. Admitting his fears brought shared sentiments bubbling to the surface. Participants began to speak, relaying their stories of struggle and triumph. Their vulnerabilities intertwined, creating an atmosphere of genuine connection. As Jake guided them through their projects, he gently challenged them to incorporate personal experiences into their art. It was liberating, watching each person carve their unique narrative into the wood, illustrating emotions through encompassing strokes. The space pulsed with creativity, an emerging community of craftspeople drawn together not just by a penchant for woodworking, but by a collective desire for self-discovery and support. Midway through the session, Jake ventured to share an experience from his past that had weighed heavily on him for years. When I first brought Bear home, I felt unworthy and afraid to succeed as his owner. But that bond has sparked something I never anticipated. Courage, he admitted, the words spilling forth as authentically as the wood shavings scattered across the floor. As he spoke, he sensed the room's atmosphere shift steadily, the collective realization that each question of worthiness paled in comparison to their united force. They weren't just crafting objects, they were sculpting a new identity. The applause of participation erupted, echoing like a symphony of shared understanding. As the workshop continued to unfold, Jake's heart surged with fulfillment. A palpable joy radiated from his colleagues as they discovered their own potential. That evening, each participant left with a piece of unfinished wood, an embodiment of their untested resilience and creativity, now intertwined with hopes that their stories would be further revealed in the days to come. Days turned into weeks, and Jake maintained the momentum he had built. Word of mouth spread, each participant lighting sparks of interest in others, expanding their sessions into a weekly fixture. New individuals arrived for their seats at the table, eager to learn not just about woodworking but about their own journeys. Each session further reinforced Jake's confidence as word spread of the place where fear was met with acceptance and creativity flourished. As he stood back one evening, surveying the vibrant community he nurtured, a sense of awe washed over him. He remembered the guarded man who had once stood alone, filled with doubt and retreat, but now he was standalone, solid, and recognized. Bear approached, nuzzling against Jake's side, grounding him in the moment. He turned his gaze toward the last unresolved piece for the community, a small corner where he envisioned a dedicated space that showcased their creations, a gallery of vulnerable journeys encapsulated in wood. With a driving desire to take that leap, Jake pinned together notes, sketches, and ideas, the kernel of transformation he envisioned, ready to become reality. This was just the beginning. He felt lighter, unburdened by doubt. Now he stood tall, confident in not only his abilities but also equipped with an immense appreciation for the shared journey ahead. Jake realized that while challenges may arise and uncertainties persisted, he was ready to embrace them. His relationship with Bear had served as a catalyst, igniting a flame that had once flickered dimly. Now, it burned brightly, illuminating the path toward authentic self-expression and empowering community connection. As he closed that chapter of preparation, Jake felt a wave of richness, a fulfillment that resonated deeply within him. He stood assured of the impact this space could create as he leaned into the transformative power of vulnerability, alongside a growing tapestry of individuals navigating their own journeys together. The past no longer defined him. It was merely the foundation from which he built something extraordinary. Today, Jake didn't just look to the horizon. He eagerly welcomed what lay ahead, buoyed by confidence and a willingness to engage fully in the beautiful mess of life, a life worth sharing, forging connections that could withstand any trial. This was his moment of transformation, a triumph over isolation, a new zest for life, and an invitation for all to join him on a continuing journey of creativity, connection, and courageous heart. Now it's your turn. You need to subscribe now to the channel to keep up with exclusive emotional stories just like this one. Leave a like now to help us feed the algorithm and spread these inspiring journeys. Your support truly matters. Comment below with your reactions and theories about Jake's journey. We love to hear your thoughts and perspectives. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. The gift of hope and transformation is meant to be shared.